Hello, BookTube. I hope you're all doing well. It's that time of the month for everyone's July reading wrap-ups. And before I get into mine, we have to start off with an event that comes around every year now in the month of August called GarbAugust, started by Ollie over at Criminali. The whole month is dedicated to reading trashy novels. I must admit, I haven't participated in the past because trashy novels weren't normally my thing. However, a few months ago, I came across an old interview on YouTube with a celebrity that I was quite drawn to during my childhood in the 90s. In the interview, they talked about this book he had out at the time. So I went on eBay, found a copy of the book. I've been holding on to it for months, and I've been waiting for this month to share it with you all. This is a nonfiction, I guess you can't really call it a memoir because it was written in present time. But there's a figure in the 90s, a famous athlete, quite a controversial and colorful figure to say the least. A lot of it well deserved. In some ways, the guy was very misunderstood. Anyway, the man is Dennis Rodman, the great basketball player, and his book from the mid 90s, Bad as I Want to Be. First of all, just look at that cover and tell me that isn't trashy enough. Now, first, it's worth noting too, Dennis Rodman, one of the all-time greatest basketball players. You ever hear him in interviews, you realize just how smart he is, but needless to say, look at the guy. He can easily get misrepresented or mistaken as someone who's just a personality. Back in the 90s when this came out, my timetable's a little off. I'll figure it out when I read this. This book came out either just before he joined the Chicago Bulls or just after. I'm not sure. After I read this, I'll figure it out. And I found an interview on Oprah Winfrey back in the day. He was talking about this book, talking about his partying days, because the 90s were really the peak of excess before kind of society kind of hit the reset button in the 2000s. And Dennis Rodman was in the right place at the right time for that. See, at the time, he dated Madonna. Apparently there's a couple the hot stories in here about his relationship with Madonna. Apparently she wanted to have his baby at one point. He's quite a colorful character with a colorful life. I think this cover is good for a trashy picture. Look at the back. I took the liberty of putting a post-it note over Rodman's behind there. Yep, you see it all right in the back cover. So yeah, I can't wait to read this. Like I said, I've been holding on to this for months. I'm looking forward to reading it and sharing it with you all for GarbAugust. We'll start with my July reading wrap-up. You may have noticed in my thumbnail photo a very familiar face. That's the character Jiminy Glick. He's played by one of the all-time great comedic actors, Martin Short, someone I've grown up loving my whole life too. Dennis Rodman and Martin Short. I had a wide range of stuff. There was a wide range of stuff that I loved when I was a child. And back in 2014, Martin Short wrote his memoir. It's a wordy title here. It was called "I Must Say: My Life as a Humble Comedy Legend." That's very Martin Short. Right at the bat in the title, he calling himself a humble legend. But I don't think I'm digging into this too much. There is a lot more to that title, as you read the book. But before I get there, before I explain that, I just have to explain one other thing first for you. If you love classic comedy, Martin Short, he was at the start of it all, up in Toronto, at the local scene. He talks about all the would-be actors that would become so famous, like Gilda Radner, who he dated for a couple of years, John Candy, and on the local scene, the piano player was Paul Schaefer, who would later on go to be the band leader for David Letterman forever. And what else? Oh God, Victor Garber, Eugene Levy, all these great comedians. They all started together on the scene in Toronto. A lot of them came to the United States and joined a show that would become Saturday Night Live. Just oh God, it was like name drop one after the other. I guess one story in the book, as a young man, there was another couple, his age, his peers. They were in the theater. They were in character as an old couple the entire day. They stayed in character the entire day. Well, this couple, the young man was Dan Aykroyd. Another name drop for you. I'll go back to what I was talking about, the title being more than just a funny line, a humble legend. Martin Short, after you read his life story, he really was a humble guy over the years. By the time he was 20, Like both of his parents had passed away, and one of his siblings. And then, like this book came out in 2014. Like 3 years before that, his wife had passed away from cancer. And honestly, that was one of the one parts I really took away from him too. Just like his love and affection for his wife, like it really came off. Like it read so well in the book. And one thing mentioning too, if you do want to check this book out, I almost want to say don't even bother getting a print of the book. I say just listen to the audiobook because like Martin does the narrating himself. I've said in the past too, there's nothing I love more than a memoir that's narrated by that person. In this case, like such a brilliant actor like Martin Short, he's done so many voices over the years. Like he does his own characters' voices in the narration. He breaks out into a little song, and there's some music every now and then. So I almost want to say like if you are interested in this, like don't even bother reading it, just get the audiobook. And a true testament to what a legend Martin is today. Like he's still going. Like he and his peer, his other comedy legend Steve Martin, they've had a stage show for a few years now that's done very well. They're now starring with Selena Gomez in the show on Hulu, Only Murders in the Building. Like, I've only seen a few episodes myself, but it's just like classic them. And then Selena Gomez, she's wonderful too. So when the guy called himself a legend, legends don't die. And the guy's still going today. He's in his mid-70s. And I meant to say before too, the character in my thumbnail photo, Jiminy Glick, one of my all-time favorite characters of his. Like Jiminy Glick did interviews with celebrities, and I'll include some videos down below for you. Like part of the charm of the interview is that Jiminy, like he'd always get his facts wrong. He kind of roast who he was interviewing. It was hilarious. I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole with some of his interviews recently, and one thing I discovered, and this is just pure coincidence, Jiminy's been making a comeback lately. Like he's been on a couple of shows recently and just absolutely killed it. So I couldn't recommend this book even more. It's like my life as a humble comedy legend. Okay, and next, there's a very famous mystery spy thriller writer named John le Carré. Now, his name is French, but he's actually British. Le Carré is just a pen name. He wrote. He just passed away a couple years ago too. He was still writing mystery novels to the end of his life. He wrote a series of novels with this character named George Smiley, and I recently read the very first novel, the first George Smiley novel. It's also the first novel Le Carré ever wrote. It's called Call for the Dead. And first I might say I've read some of Le Carré's later works, like The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and one that came out much later, in maybe the turn of the century, called The Constant Gardener. It's interesting. I read those books first, then I go back to this debut of his, Call for the Dead, and like you see, like his style of writing, he pretty much had down since the beginning. Like very eloquent, very formal. So like really, like the guy right from the start, he had a good sense of how he was going to write his books. And but Call for the Dead was interesting too, because in a way you do see how Le Carré progressed over the years, because Call for the Dead is like a straight up good old fashioned murder mystery, and then like it would evolve into the spy thrillers that became. So let's see, and what else? Yeah, leave it at that. I'll leave it at that too. Le Carré, I can't wait to read more of his works too. He was just brilliant. And I mentioned his novel The Spy Who Came Here From the Cold. We'll get to that down the road too, but like it's part of the George Smiley series, but it's a complete standalone novel. One of the greatest spy novels in general I've ever read. So, but we'll get to that at a later point too. That's the third book, and I've only started the first one of the series. Next up, this will be short too. Of the books I've read, this is the only one I actually own a physical copy of, and that is Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. Now, right at the bat, you see our man Michael C. Hall there. Dexter, one of my all-time favorite shows. It was so dark and so twisted and like oddly funny. Ran for quite a while on Showtime, and it was based on a series of books. And this is book one. I never read the books before. I just picked it up. I own the second copy. It's on my shelf behind me there. And the only thing I'll say about this, like I knew this in advance before I read this. Like there was like, you wonder like how many books were adapted into the show. Only the first one, and that's not a spoiler in any way, because like if you watch the show, and you're discovering the books like myself, or you read the books and you go back and watch the show. Like the second the book starts, you're like, oh yeah, it's the I know where this is going. So really, yeah, book one and season one are very very similar. Like the characters, I like how they updated the characters a little bit for the show. But like either way, it's still off to a great start. So like season one of the show and book one of the are very very similar for the most part with a couple of changes. Next up, we have a John Grisham novel called Camino Winds. It's a sequel to Camino Island, which I read and reviewed last month. Now, Grisham is interesting. Like he just released his 50th book, Camino Ghost, the third book in this series actually. And in recent years, he's written books that he's never done before, and by that I mean sequels. He's going back and revisiting some of his classics, his original characters, but he's going in a completely different direction. Like with these sequels, like the Camino Island was a heist novel essentially, and this one we meet up with the main character Bruce Cable, like the lovable SOB that he is, and all the other author friends of his who live on Camino Island. And this book is a murder mystery. Like there's a character, he was like a whistleblower for like arms dealers, and now like he wrote a couple tell-all books, and now he's living on Camino Island. And there's like a terrible hurricane that comes through, devastates everything, and Bruce Cable and his friends that we've already met in the first novel, they come across this guy's body, and they think outside all the debris and whatnot. So like, let's just say all the authorities and emergency services, they're busy cleaning up after the hurricane. They see a body out there and all this rubble. They think he was killed in the storm. But Bruce Cable and his other author friends are convinced that it was a murder, and they're determined to try and solve this. And of course, they go down a rabbit hole. They cover more than they anticipated. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun reconnecting with these old characters. And they all come back too from the first one. And finally, folks, my fifth and final book that I read this month, over on Fable, the Fable app, one of the book clubs I'm in is dedicated to reading Stephen King novels, and we just finished King's big one, The Stand. So let me say, lived up to the hype, absolutely epic. And like, God knows, there's no shortage of reviews for The Stand on YouTube here, so I'll keep it very brief. Let's see. One of the things that remains fascinating to me is just like the way King writes like in-depth like history. It's like of his characters. Like we don't just get like a little backstory, get to know them. Like he writes like he writes their lives essentially, and it's almost what you would expect in a King book too. And like it was just incredible, like so detailed to read. And let's see. Oh yeah, one thing I'll just make up one other point about the Stand. Like heading into it, I knew that it was going to be an apocalyptic novel, but it was more than that. Like King, like he really wrote a fictional account of the apocalypse. It's like the disease is spreading, the flu, the world's coming to an end. There's a battle of good and evil. It's like King, like literally wrote a fictional account of the apocalypse. It was quite fascinating. I think it's safe to say that by judging by how this apocalypse concludes at the end, with a little assistance. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Now that I'm introduced to this Randall Flagg character, I can finally get started with the Dark Tower series as well. Good Lord, got a lot on my plate coming up for the rest of the year. And that'll wrap it up, folks. I hope you all have a wonderful August. Happy reading. Yeah, I'm gonna go hang out with my buddy Dennis for a little bit. Oh God, I can only imagine what's in this book here. And I mentioned too his interview on Oprah, the Jiminy Glick interviews. If I can find some videos, I'll put them down in the description box below for you. Happy reading, everyone. Take care.